The recreation bay of ISS Horizon hummed with the low, comforting throb of distant engines and the not-so-comforting rattle of the ancient ventilation unit that everyone swore was haunted. Jake Morrison sat at the round table with his fellow technicians picking at a bowl of something the station cook called noodles, but which possessed the texture of insulation foam mixed with regret. The fluorescent lights above flickered in their eternal struggle against the void outside, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional despair that made even the most optimistic souls question their life choices. Tom Vasquez dropped into the seat across from him, his tray clattering against the metal surface with the enthusiasm of a man who had long ago given up on grace. His dark eyes sparkled with the mischief that had gotten both of them into trouble more times than either cared to count during their years in the Air Force together. The scar above his left eyebrow caught the light as he leaned forward, already wearing that expression that meant Jake's peace was about to be thoroughly destroyed. The other technicians around the table were engaged in their usual debates about which module had the worst plumbing and whether area the station's artificial intelligence was secretly plotting against them all. Martinez was convinced the AI had developed a personal vendetta against him after he accidentally spilled coffee on a sensor array. Thompson maintained that the recycled water tasted different depending on which day of the week it was processed. Normal conversations for people living in a tin can orbiting 200 miles above everything they had ever known. Tom's elbow connected with Jake's ribs in that familiar way that meant incoming trouble. Jake braced himself, fork suspended halfway to his mouth, the foam-textured noodle dangling like a question mark. The words came with the predictability of orbital mechanics. "So Morrison, when are you finally going to confess to your long-eared admirer?" The table erupted in knowing chuckles. Jake felt his neck grow warm despite the station's perpetually cool recycled air. Everyone on Horizon knew about his situation because secrets were impossible to keep in a pressurized tube where the walls were thin and the gossip had traveled faster than light-speed communications back to Earth. They had watched him fumble his words every time the Zelthar engineer walked past. They had seen him find excuses to be in whatever module she was working in. Jake snorted, aiming for dismissive and landing somewhere closer to defensive. His mind flashed to Lyra Venshar, to the elegant curve of her ears, to the way her golden eyes seemed to hold entire galaxies within their depths. He had been watching her for 3 months now, ever since she arrived on the station as a part of the joint Human-Zelthar engineering initiative. 3 months of stolen glances and manufactured encounters, and absolutely zero progress on the actually talking to her front. The words flew out easy, tossed like scrap metal into a bin, harmless as breathing, "Please. If she ever proposed to me, I would say yes instantly. No hesitation, zero thinking required." Everyone laughed. Jake leaned back smug at landing one good joke before the shift ended, enjoying the camaraderie that came from shared absurdity. Tom nearly choked on his reconstituted coffee substitute. Martinez slapped the table. The moment stretched warm and golden in the artificial light, a pocket of humanity floating through the cosmic dark. Then the room went strangely quiet. Jake assumed the vending unit was doing that thing again, where it tried to communicate in binary, its ancient programming occasionally glitching in ways that made it seem almost sentient. But no, his squad mates were staring past him with the expression soldiers get when a superior officer or a small but very angry animal is directly behind someone. Jake turned. She was there. Lyra Venshar stood in the doorway like a question the universe had forgotten to answer. Her long ears curved elegantly upward, twitching with unreadable emotion, their tips catching the fluorescent light and transforming it into something almost beautiful. Her eyes deep and luminous and unsettling in the way stars can be unsettling when you remember how far away they really are rested on him. Not cold, not angry, just present. A presence that made his lungs forget they had responsibilities. Her skin held that pale blue tint characteristic of her species, like winter twilight captured and made flesh. She stood 6 feet tall, graceful in a way that made human movement seem clumsy by comparison. The insignia of the Zelthar Science Division gleamed on her shoulder, a reminder of the interstellar cooperation that had brought 2 species together on this floating outpost. She blinked once, slow and deliberate, then inclined her head as politely as if she had walked into a briefing instead of a disaster of Jake's own making. The silence stretched like taffy, sweet and suffocating. Lyra's ears angled forward, a gesture he had learned indicated focused attention. Her lips parted, and when she spoke, her voice carried that harmonic quality unique to her species, then say it human. The words hung in the recycled air like particles of dust caught in a sunbeam. And then she walked away, steps quiet on the metal floor posture, steady ears angled in a way Jake had never seen before. The automatic door slid shut behind her with a soft pneumatic hiss that sounded entirely too much like the universe laughing. His squad exploded into suppressed cackling. Tom nearly slid off his chair, grabbing the table edge for support. Martinez made a sound like a deflating balloon. Tom's voice came out strangled with glee. "You're dead. You know that right? Vaporized. Emotionally disintegrated." Jake's mouth opened, closed, opened again. His brain was still processing, still running the calculations on what had just happened. Had she just responded to his joke with something that might possibly, perhaps, potentially have been a counterproposal? "Oh, shut up." The words came out weak. He stabbed his foam noodle with unnecessary violence. "She probably didn't even hear me properly." Translation glitch. The ventilation unit chose that exact moment to groan, emitting a sound that bore a suspicious resemblance to the word error, as if even the station's ancient infrastructure disagreed with his assessment. Jake spent the rest of the break trying to pretend his heart was not performing a small frantic opera. The station outside the bay windows drifted past the red swirl of a nebula, its glow bleeding into the metal corridors. Earth was visible in the distance, a blue marble hanging in the infinite black. Drones zipped by on maintenance tasks, occasionally spinning in circles because someone had accidentally installed the wrong navigation software. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but there was something different in the air of the station now. Quiet, charged, waiting. A soft chime from the intercom interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Aria's neutral voice filled the recreation bay. "Technician Morrison, you have been assigned to overnight maintenance duty in Module C, Sector 7. Engineer Venshar will be your partner for this shift. Please report in 30 minutes. Tom's grin widened to dangerous proportions. Jake briefly considered the possibility that Aria had developed sentience and was actively meddling in his personal life. The AI ran everything on the station from life support to the complex dance of resource allocation that kept them all alive. If it had decided to play matchmaker, there was exactly nothing he could do about it. Module C stretched before him like a cathedral of technology, its high ceilings lost in shadows that the maintenance lights could not fully penetrate. Banks of equipment hummed along both walls, their indicator lights blinking in patterns that told stories to anyone who knew how to read them. The sector had been experiencing intermittent power fluctuations for the past week, nothing critical, but annoying enough that Commander Chen had finally authorized a full diagnostic. Lyra was already there when Jake arrived. She stood before an open access panel, her long fingers tracing the paths of fiber optic cables with the delicacy of a musician reading sheet music. Her ears were canted forward in concentration, their tips occasionally twitching in response to sounds below human hearing range. The dim lighting caught the subtle iridescence of her skin, made her seem almost luminous against the industrial backdrop. She did not turn at his approach, but her ears rotated slightly in his direction, tracking his footsteps. When she spoke, her voice carried that multi-tonal quality that always made Jake's spine tingle. "You are 4 minutes early, Jake Morrison." Old habit, military training. They beat punctuality into you until it becomes a personality disorder. Her lips curved in what he had learned to recognize as a Zelthar smile, subtle but unmistakable. "I have read your personnel file. 8 years in the United States Air Force. Specialized in aircraft electrical systems. Honorable discharge." "You read my file." "I read all personnel files. It is efficient to understand one's colleagues." A pause. "Yours was more interesting than most." Jake approached the access panel, positioning himself on the opposite side so that the open machinery created a barrier between them. And what made mine interesting? The gaps. Her golden eyes finally met his, and the impact was physical, like a pressure change in the atmosphere. "Your file contains significant redactions, areas that have been classified or removed. I find myself curious about what stories hide in those empty spaces." He busied himself with his diagnostic tablet, calling up the system schematics. "Some stories aren't meant to be shared. Some things are better left in the dark." Lyra's ears flattened slightly. "On my world, we believe that darkness shared becomes light, that secrets carried alone grow heavy enough to crush the bearer." She returned her attention to the cables, but I understand that humans view such things differently. They worked in silence for a time, falling into the rhythm that came naturally to engineers everywhere. Jake traced power conduits, while Lyra read the electromagnetic signatures with her species' innate sensitivity. They identified the source of the fluctuations, a microfracture in a junction box that had allowed moisture to create intermittent shorts. Standard repair, routine problem solving. About earlier, the words escaped before he could stop them. In the recreation bay, what you said. Lyra's hands stilled on the cables. Her ears rose to full attention. Yes, I need to know if you were serious, or were you matching my joke with one of your own? A weighted pause hung between them. When Lyra finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its harmonic richness. In Zelothar culture, the words I spoke carry great weight. They are not offered lightly or in jest. Jake's breath caught in his throat. However, she continued, still not looking at him. I am aware that humans approach such matters differently. I do not wish to cause you distress by misreading your intentions. So you were serious? I was hopeful. Her ears curved backward, a gesture of vulnerability he had never seen from her before. I have observed you for many cycles since my arrival. The way you work, the way you treat others, the way your eyes follow me when you believe I am not watching. A pause. I came to the recreation bay tonight specifically because I knew you would be there. I did not expect to hear that. The confession hung in the air between them. Jake felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, even though they were floating in orbit, and there was no ground to shift. His chest tightened as the words slipped out. I wasn't joking either. Lyra's head turned sharply, her amber gaze wide with something that looked remarkably like hope. Her ears trembled, the tips quivering with barely contained emotion. Then perhaps we should begin at the beginning. Her voice wavered in a way he had never heard before. Not with proposals or promises, but with understanding. I would like to know you, Jake Morrison. The real you, not the jokes you hide behind. Jake felt something crack inside his chest. Something he had built strong walls around 3 years ago. He thought about Sarah, about the car accident that had taken her, about the guilt that had accompanied him into orbit. He had loved her completely. He had lost her completely. The idea of opening himself to that possibility again was terrifying. But standing here in this dim module, looking into eyes that held galaxies, he felt something else pushing back against the fear. A curiosity, a longing, a recognition that maybe hiding from life was just a slower way of dying. Okay, his voice steadied as decision crystallized within him. Let's start at the beginning. The days that followed rewrote the rules of Jake Morrison's existence. He found himself gravitating toward Lyra during every break, seeking her out in the corridors, manufacturing reasons to extend their conversations. She reciprocated with an eagerness that surprised him, as if she had been waiting for permission to stop pretending she did not notice him either. They established rituals. Breakfast in the observation lounge became their anchor, watching Earth rotate slowly below, while sharing meals that ranged from moderately edible to culinary disasters. Their first floating dinner nearly ended in catastrophe when Jake's attempt to demonstrate how humans eat pizza in zero gravity resulted in cheese globules drifting toward Lyra's face. She caught them with reflexes faster than human eyes could track, then proceeded to analyze the food's molecular structure through taste alone. This is simultaneously fascinating and concerning. Her ears twitched as she processed the flavors. Your species consumes fermented milk products layered on processed grain with pureed vegetation, and you find this enjoyable. Jake couldn't help but laugh. Wait until I introduce you to hot dogs. You'll really question our survival as a species. She offered him Zelthar Gel sustenance in return, a luminescent substance that tasted like mint mixed with copper and starlight. Jake managed to swallow it without gagging, which Lyra informed him was a significant achievement for a human palate. Jake taught her about human humor, explaining puns and sarcasm, and the particular joy of a well-timed callback. Lyra's initial confusion gradually transformed into appreciation, and eventually she started attempting jokes of her own. Why did the human cross the station? She asked one morning, ears perked with anticipation. I don't know. Why, to get to the other module. She paused. Is that correct? I am uncertain about the structure. Jake laughed, not because the joke was good, but because her serious dedication to mastering human comedy was the most endearing thing he had witnessed in years. Lyra taught him about Zelthar's sensory perception, about the way her species could feel electrical currents, the way humans felt temperature. She placed his hand on a power conduit and described what she was experiencing, a symphony of energy flows that human senses were simply not equipped to detect. She also told him about her family. They did not approve of my assignment here. Her voice carried old pain. My parents believe humans are primitive, that our species should share technology and receive resources in return, but that actual collaboration is beneath us. They were floating in the observation deck after a late shift, the stars wheeling slowly past the windows. Jake had discovered that zero gravity made everything feel more intimate, the lack of up and down forcing them closer together. Do you agree with them? Her ears flattened in displeasure. If I agreed, I would not be here. I believe that intelligence should recognize intelligence regardless of the vessel it inhabits. She stopped, seemed to struggle with something. I believe that you are proof my parents are wrong, that there is depth and beauty in human hearts that my people refuse to see. The words landed like meteorites in the quiet between them. No one had looked at Jake like that in years, like he was something worth discovering. Before he could respond, Arya's voice interrupted. Attention Module C personnel. Routine gravity system test commencing in 30 seconds. Please secure all loose items. They scrambled to grab floating objects, stuffing tablets and tools into magnetic pouches. The test lasted only 2 minutes, artificial gravity returning in a slow wave that made Jake's stomach perform uncomfortable gymnastics. When it stabilized, he found himself standing close to Lyra, close enough to count the faint, freckle-like markings that dusted her cheekbones. Neither of them stepped back. The next test came 3 days later, though not from station systems. Jake and Lyra were repairing a malfunctioning drone in Module B when the gravity stabilizers failed without warning. One moment they were standing at a workbench, the next they were floating, surrounded by tools and drone components, spinning lazily through the air. The drone itself, partially reassembled and apparently possessed by a mischievous spirit, activated unexpectedly. Its propulsion system fired in random bursts, sending it careening around the module like a mechanical pinball. Jake lunged to catch it and missed his momentum, carrying him into a web of power cables suspended from the ceiling. Lyra moved to help him, but the drone chose that moment to make a kamikaze run directly at her head. She dodged gracefully, her superior reflexes, saving her from a face full of malfunctioning machinery, but the evasive maneuver sent her spinning directly into Jake's tangled form. They collided in a confusion of limbs and cables, Jake's attempt to catch her only making things worse as they both became increasingly enmeshed in the power lines. The drone continued its rampage in the background, bouncing off walls and emitting sounds that might have been distress signals or mechanical laughter. "Stop moving!" Lyra's voice came from somewhere near his left ear. "You are making it worse." "I'm trying to—" Jake's elbow caught another cable. "This is not how I pictured this going. You pictured us entangled in power cables. I pictured us being competent professionals who could handle a simple drone repair." They were wrapped around each other now, faces inches apart, the cables creating a cocoon that left very little room for personal space. Lyra's ears brushed against his cheeks, soft and surprisingly warm. Her amber gaze filled his entire field of vision. The station's intercom crackled to life, Arya's voice somehow managing to sound amused despite its artificial nature. Now playing requested ambient music for Module B. The opening notes of "Can't Help Falling in Love" drifted through the speakers. Jake closed his eyes. "I did not request that." "Nor did I." Lyra's voice held a note of suspicion. "I believe your AI has developed a concerning interest in our personal affairs." Arya turned that off. "I'm sorry, Technician Morrison. I am experiencing a localized audio system malfunction. Estimated repair time, the duration of this song." Tom's voice burst through the radio. "Jake, you okay? Sensors show you're tangled up in Module B." "I'm fine, just a little situation." "A situation with Engineer Venshar according to the life sign readings. You two are basically occupying the same space." "Tom, I swear to God." "Don't worry, buddy. I'll give you some privacy." The radio clicked off, but not before Jake heard suppressed laughter. Lyra's lips curved into that subtle smile he was learning to love. "Your colleague is quite invested in our relationship. He's invested in making my life as embarrassing as possible." Jake shifted, trying to find a way to untangle them that did not involve more inappropriate contact. "I'm sorry about this." The drone that cables Arya's musical commentary. "Do not apologize." Her voice was soft now, the harmonics gentler. "I find myself not minding the proximity." The confession stopped his struggles. Their eyes met, and in the dim light of Module B, floating among power cables with Elvis crooning about fools rushing in, Jake Morrison felt the last of his resistance begin to crumble. "Lyra, I need to tell you something about why I came here, about what I'm running from. You do not owe me your secrets." "No, but I want to give them to you anyway." They eventually freed themselves, though neither could remember exactly who had found the solution. They drifted to the observation deck, finding the alcove where the curve of the window created privacy. Earth glowed below continents and oceans sliding past in silent majesty. Her name was Sarah. The words came hard, dragged up from places he had sealed shut. We met during my last deployment. She was a civilian contractor smarter than anyone I'd ever known. We got married within 6 months. We were going to build a life together. All the normal stuff people dream about. Lyra listened without interrupting, her ears angled toward him in complete attention. 3 years ago, she was driving home from a work conference. Drunk driver ran a red light doing 60 in a 30 zone. She died before the ambulance arrived. He paused, breathing through the familiar ache. I wasn't there. I was on a training exercise in another state. By the time they found me, she had been gone for hours. Jake! His name and her voice sounded like a prayer. After that, I couldn't stay on Earth. Everywhere I looked, I saw her. Every room we had been in together. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. He exhaled slowly. So I ran, applied for ISS Horizon, left the planet entirely. I told myself I was honoring her memory, but really I was trying to find somewhere she had never been. Silence settled between them. Through the window, the lights of a city twinkled on the dark side of Earth, millions of lives unaware of conversations happening 200 miles above. Lyra spoke carefully, and has it worked this running? No, I'm still empty, still going through motions. He turned to look at her. Until recently, until you started showing up in my peripheral vision, until I started feeling something again, even if it terrified me. Her hand found his, her fingers cooler than a human's, but somehow warming him anyway. I cannot replace what you have lost. I would not want to try. I know, I'm not asking you to, but I can offer you something else. Those galaxy-holding irises held his. The chance to discover whether your heart has room for new growth alongside old grief, whether joy and sorrow can coexist. Jake felt tears threatening the first he had allowed himself in years. I'm scared. More scared than I've ever been of anything. I am scared too. Her grip tightened. If I continue on this path with you, I risk losing everything I know. My family, my standing, perhaps even my ability to return home. She paused. But some risks are worth taking. Some fears are worth facing. And I would rather be afraid with you than safe without you. The words settled into his bones. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers in a gesture that transcended species in the vast darkness between stars. She leaned into him, and when their lips finally met, it felt like coming home to a place he had never been, but had always known existed. They stayed that way for a long time, breathing together, feeling the universe rotate around them. Commander Chen's summons came 4 days later. Jake reported to her office with the spine-straight posture that 8 years of military service had embedded into his muscle memory. Chen was a small woman with steel in her spine and sharp intelligence in her eyes, the kind of leader who earned respect through competence rather than demanding it through rank. Morrison, I've been receiving reports about your relationship with Engineer Venshar. The Zelthar ambassador contacted me this morning with concerns about one of his engineers becoming attached to a human maintenance technician. She paused. I told him that personal relationships between consenting adults were outside my jurisdiction unless they affected station operations. I understand if this creates complications, Commander. What I need to know is whether this relationship is real, whether you're genuinely pursuing something with her, or whether this is just passing the time. It's real. The words came without hesitation, the most real thing I've felt in years. Chen nodded slowly. Good, then hold on to it, because the pressure is only going to increase from both sides. She gestured toward the door. Dismissed. And for what it's worth, I'm rooting for you. The warning came 23 hours later. Jake was in Module C again, running standard diagnostics on the same system he and Lyra had repaired weeks earlier. His tablet beeped with an anomaly alert. The readings made no sense at first. Power fluctuations in the main engine module far more severe than anything the microfracture should have caused. Jake cross-referenced the data, ran secondary diagnostics, and felt ice crystallize in his stomach as the picture became clear. This was not a malfunction. Someone had deliberately destabilized the thermal regulation system in a way that would cause cascading failures within 6 hours. The station's main engines would overheat, backup systems would engage, then fail, and without immediate intervention, ISS Horizon would become a very expensive coffin. Jake triggered the emergency intercom. Commander Chen, this is Morrison. We have a critical situation in Module E. Someone has sabotaged the thermal regulation system. I'm reading cascade failure initiation in approximately 6 hours. Chen's response came within seconds. All senior staff to Module E, this is not a drill. The next hours became organized chaos. Jake led the diagnostic team his military training, providing the steady framework that civilian engineers needed. They traced the sabotage to a device hidden in the cooling system, military-grade technology designed to cause maximum damage. Tom appeared at his shoulder. Jake, I recognize this tech. We use stuff like this in covert ops. Someone with access to restricted military equipment did this. The answer came when Commander Chen reported finding David Carter, one of the junior technicians attempting to disable the communications array. His arrest revealed a connection to Marcus Hendricks, a senior ISA official on Earth, who had been publicly critical of the Joint Human Zelthar program. The sabotage was meant to destroy the station and blame the Zelthar. Lyra found Jake in the engine module as he worked to disarm the final failsafe. Her presence announced itself through the now familiar sense of her that had developed over weeks of growing closer. Jake's hands paused on the device. You shouldn't be here. If this goes wrong, then we face it together. Her voice carried no room for argument. I did not find someone worth caring about only to abandon him at the first sign of trouble. They worked side by side as the clock ticked down. Lyra detected energy signatures Jake's instruments missed. Jake applied technical knowledge her training had not covered. Together, they navigated the saboteur's traps until only one remained. 30 seconds on this countdown. A junction that could be cut one of 3 ways, only one of which would prevent disaster. Jake's hands trembled. The ghost of old fears whispered in his ear, reminded him of other moments when the weight of lives rested on his shoulders. Lyra's hand covered his cool and steady. Through the contact, he felt something flow into him, a calmness that was not his own. Her species could share emotional states through touch. She had mentioned it once. He had not understood until now what that truly meant. His hand stopped shaking. Trust yourself, Jake Morrison. He cut the wire. The countdown stopped at 3 seconds. Silence fell over the module, broken only by the returning hum of stabilized systems. Around them, crew members erupted into ragged cheers. Jake exhaled a breath he had not realized he was holding. He turned to Lyra. She was looking at him with an expression between pride and wonder. You saved the station. We saved the station. I couldn't have done it without you. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the individual striations of gold in her eyes. Jake Morrison, in my culture, sharing consciousness during a crisis creates a bond that cannot be unmade. What I gave you ties our spirits together in ways your language does not have words for. His pulse quickened. Are you saying we're... I am saying that when you joked about accepting a proposal, you gave me permission to hope. Now I am giving you permission to understand that my hope has become conviction. He thought about walls that needed to come down, about hearts that could expand to hold both grief and joy, about second chances that only came to those brave enough to reach for them. He reached for her hand. Then I accept, not as a joke, not as a hypothesis, for as long as you'll have me. Lyra's ears rose to their full height, trembling with emotion. Her eyes grew luminous with something that might have been tears in a human, but was something else entirely in her species. The station hummed around them, restored to stability, carrying them both through the dark between worlds. Earth glowed blue in the distance. The stars wheeled in their eternal dance. And in that moment, suspended between catastrophe and peace, 2 hearts from different corners of the universe found the gravity they had been waiting for. The aftermath of crisis has a peculiar texture. Jake Morrison discovered a strange compression of time where hours feel like minutes and minutes stretch into eternities. The station's emergency lights had faded back to standard illumination. The alarm silenced the immediate danger past, but the tension remained coiled in the station's atmosphere like a spring waiting to release. ISS Horizon had survived, but survival was only the beginning of the questions that needed answering. David Carter sat in the station's small detention module, a space originally designed for medical quarantine that had been hastily repurposed for a purpose no one had anticipated needing. Through the reinforced glass of the observation window, Jake watched the man who had nearly killed them all. Carter looked smaller than he had seemed during their brief encounters in the corridors, diminished somehow by the fluorescent lighting and the weight of what he had attempted. Commander Chen stood beside Jake, her tablet displaying the preliminary findings of the security investigation. Tom Vasquez flanked her other side, his usually jovial expression replaced by something harder and more focused. The three of them had been conducting interviews for the past 6 hours, piecing together the scope of the conspiracy that had nearly ended in catastrophe. He's not talking anymore. Chen's voice carried the exhaustion that none of them could afford to show. Shut down completely after we found his communication logs. Whatever Hendricks promised him was apparently worth dying for. Jake studied Carter through the glass, searching for something in the man's face that might explain how a person could justify murdering dozens of innocent people for ideology. He found nothing but emptiness, a blank expression that refused to engage with the magnitude of his choices. Tom pulled up a holographic display of the evidence they had compiled. The communication logs show regular contact with someone on Earth using military encryption protocols. The messages reference Operation Clean Slate and mention specific dates that correspond with supply shipment schedules. Carter was waiting for the right moment when the station would have maximum Zelthar personnel and minimum Earthside oversight. Maximum casualties. Jake's voice came out flat. He wanted to make sure as many of them died as possible. Chen nodded grimly. The thermal disruptors were positioned to take out the Zelthar residential modules first. By the time the cascade reached human sections, evacuation would have been possible for our people. This was designed as a targeted attack disguised as a systems failure. The implications settled over Jake like a physical weight. Lyra's quarters were in the Zelthar section. If they had not discovered the sabotage, if he had not recognized the military technology, she would have been among the first to die. The thought made his chest constrict in ways that had nothing to do with the filtered oxygen. What do we know about Hendricks' involvement? Chen swiped through her tablet. Marcus Hendricks, 62 years old, senior official in the International Space Agency's Oversight Committee. He's been vocal about his opposition to the joint program since its inception. Claims the Zelthar are using the Cooperation Initiative to gather intelligence on human military capabilities. She paused. He also has connections to several nationalist organizations that view any alien contact as an existential threat to human sovereignty. So he decided to start a war. That appears to be the plan. Create an incident that could be blamed on Zelthar negligence or hostility, use the resulting outrage to justify ending the cooperation program, and position himself as the voice of reason who warned everyone this would happen. Chen's expression hardened. He's not just a bigot with a platform. He's a strategist, and he's not going to stop because one saboteur got caught. Tom pulled up another display, this one showing ISS Horizon's communication logs with Earth. Commander, you should see this. We've been monitoring transmissions since the incident. There's been a significant increase in encrypted traffic between ISA headquarters and military channels. Something's happening down there. Chen's eyes narrowed as she scanned the data. Whatever she saw there made her jaw tighten in a way that Jake had learned to recognize as very bad news. Get Lyra and the senior Zelthar staff to the command center. We need to have a conversation about what comes next. The command center of ISS Horizon occupied the station's central hub, a circular room with displays covering every wall and a holographic projection table dominating the center. The space could accommodate the entire senior staff of both species, though it had rarely been used for that purpose. Today it felt crowded, despite the modest attendance. Jake stood near the back, positioned where he could see both Lyra and the main display. She had arrived with Kelvon, the young Zelthar engineer, who had become something of a protege to both of them over the past weeks. Kelvan's ears twitched nervously as he took in the serious expressions of the assembled personnel, his youth suddenly apparent in the way he kept glancing at Lyra for reassurance. Kelvon stood beside Lyra, his young face pale with fear, but his posture determined. "If they take us," he said quietly to her, "I want you to know working with humans has been the greatest honor of my life, especially—" He glanced toward Tom, then looked away quickly. "Certain humans." Lyra's ears curved slightly, a hint of warmth breaking through her tension. "You should tell him that yourself, Kelvon, when this is over. If this is ever over, it will be, and you will have your chance." Commander Chen activated the main display, bringing up a star chart showing the space between Earth and ISS Horizon. A blinking icon appeared at the edge of the display, moving slowly but steadily toward their position. Approximately 4 hours ago, the ISA authorized the launch of a military support vessel from Cape Canaveral. Official designation is Rescue and Recovery Mission, following what they're calling a critical systems failure aboard ISS Horizon. Chen paused to let the words sink in. Unofficial channels suggest the vessel is carrying a security team with orders to detain all Zelthar personnel for protective custody pending investigation into the incident. The room erupted in overlapping voices, human and Zelthar alike, expressing variations of confusion and outrage. Lyra's ears had gone rigid with tension angled toward Chen, in a posture that Jake now recognized as controlled alarm. Chen raised her hand for silence. I want to be clear about what this means. Hendricks has convinced enough people in authority that the Zelthar on this station represent a security threat. The fact that a human operative caused the damage is being classified. The narrative being constructed on Earth is that our Zelthar colleagues somehow compromised our systems. That's insane. The words escaped Jake before he could stop them. We have evidence. Carter's communications, the military-grade equipment, the whole chain of custody pointing directly at Hendricks. Evidence that Hendricks is working very hard to bury. Our communication array has been experiencing mysterious difficulties for the past 2 hours. Chen's expression made clear that she did not believe in coincidences. Every time we try to transmit the investigation files to independent channels on Earth, the signal degrades. Someone is jamming us, selectively allowing routine communications while blocking anything that might contradict the official story. Lyra stepped forward, her voice carrying that harmonic resonance that commanded attention. What happens when this vessel arrives? Chen met her gaze directly. If we cannot establish communication with sympathetic parties on Earth before then, the security team will board the station. They have authorization to use force if necessary. All Zelthar personnel will be removed from ISS Horizon and transported to a detention facility for interrogation. She paused. I have been informed that resisting this order will be considered an act of aggression against the United States government. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes earthquakes heavy with the weight of tectonic forces about to shift. Kelvon spoke into the quiet, his young voice trembling slightly, but determined. They cannot simply arrest us. We have diplomatic protections under the Cooperation Accords. The Cooperation Accords are being suspended pending investigation. Chen's voice was gentle but unflinching. As of 6 hours ago, your diplomatic status has been revoked by executive order. Jake watched Lyra's face as the news landed. He had learned to read her expressions over their weeks together, to interpret the subtle movements of her ears and the shifts in her golden eyes. What he saw now was not fear, not exactly. It was the careful stillness of someone calculating odds and finding them unfavorable. She turned to look at him across the crowded room, and in that moment the rest of the world fell away. All the politics and conspiracies and impossible situations compressed into a single exchange of gazes between two people who had found each other against astronomical odds and were now facing the possibility of being torn apart. Jake pushed through the crowd until he stood beside her. His hand found hers without conscious thought, their fingers interlacing in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. We'll figure this out. His voice was low, meant only for her. Will we? She did not pull away, but her ears curved backward in that gesture of uncertainty he had learned to recognize. My government will not accept this provocation quietly. If they detain us, if they treat us as prisoners, the response will be severe. War. Perhaps not immediately, but the fragile peace that has allowed our species to work together will shatter. Everything we have built, everything we have proven is possible will become a casualty of fear and hatred. Commander Chen was still speaking, outlining contingency plans and evacuation protocols, but Jake heard none of it. His entire focus had narrowed to the woman beside him and the impossible choice that was rapidly approaching. Come with me. He tugged gently at her hand. There's something I need to show you. They slipped out of the command center while Chen fielded questions, navigating the familiar corridors of a station that suddenly felt like hostile territory. Jake led Lyra to a section of Module G that few personnel had reason to visit, a maintenance access point that opened onto one of the station's external observation bays. The bay was small, barely large enough for 2 people, but it offered an unobstructed view of Earth through a reinforced polymer window. The planet hung before them in all its blue-green majesty, clouds, swirling in patterns that spoke of weather systems and ocean currents, and billions of lives continuing their daily routines, unaware of the crisis unfolding in orbit above them. This is where I come when I need to think. Jake's voice was quiet in the intimate space. When the station feels too small and the politics feel too heavy, I come here and look at that, and I remember that most of what we fight about doesn't matter at all in the face of something so beautiful. Lara moved closer to the window, her reflection ghosting over the curve of the earth. It is remarkable. My homeworld is larger, but there is something about this planet that captures the eye. Perhaps because it is so clearly alive, so obviously teeming with potential. That's what they want to destroy. Jake stood behind her, close enough to feel the subtle coolness that her species radiated. People like Hendrix, they see difference as threat rather than opportunity. They would rather burn everything down than share it with someone who doesn't look like them. Layra turned to face him, her luminous stare reflecting the earthlight. And you are different. I'd like to think so. I hope so. He reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, a gesture that felt impossibly intimate in the small space. I know that my life became infinitely more interesting the moment you walked into that recreation bay and challenged me to put my money where my mouth was. Her lips curved in that subtle smile he had come to treasure. I believe the phrase is, put your money where your mouth is, though I confess I still do not entirely understand the economic implications of that idiom. It means I was challenged to back up my words with action. And I'm glad I was, because otherwise I might have spent the rest of my life watching you from across crowded rooms and never knowing what I was missing. Lyra's hand rose to cover his where it rested against her cheek. Jake Morrison, when this vessel arrives, when they try to take me, you must not interfere. Like hell I won't. Listen to me. Her voice took on an urgency that cut through his protest. If you resist, they will arrest you as well. Your career, your life, everything you have worked for will be destroyed. And for what? A gesture of defiance that changes nothing. It changes everything. He stepped closer, eliminating the distance between them until they were breathing the same recycled air. You asked me once why I came to ISS Horizon. I told you I was running from grief, and that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth is that I had stopped believing in anything. Sarah's death broke something in me, made me think the universe was just random cruelty with no meaning or purpose. He cupped her face in both hands, holding her gaze with an intensity that surprised them both. Then I met you, and you reminded me that meaning is something we create, not something we find. That connection is possible across any distance, any difference, any divide. I am not going to stand by and watch them take that away from me. From us. Jake, no, whatever happens when that ship arrives, I'm going to be standing next to you. That's not negotiable. Lyra's ears trembled, a cascade of emotions too complex to name playing across her features. When she spoke, her voice held harmonics he had never heard before, tones that seemed to resonate in his chest rather than his ears. Then I need to tell you something about my people, something that may change how you see what is happening here. She took his hands in hers, turned them palm up, and pressed her own palms against them in a gesture that felt ceremonial. The Zelthar have been watching your species for many cycles. Long before first contact, we observed from a distance, studying your conflicts, your art, your capacity for both destruction and creation. There were those among us who argued that humanity was too dangerous, too volatile, too young to be trusted with partnership. And you disagreed. I believe that volatility was the source of your strength, not a weakness. That your species' ability to change rapidly, to adapt, to reinvent yourselves in ways that take my people centuries to achieve, made you ideal partners for facing the challenges that lie ahead. She paused. There are threats in this galaxy that neither of our species can face alone. Dangers that require the combination of Zelthar patience and human adaptability. The cooperation program was never just about sharing technology. It was about preparing for something larger. The weight of her words settled into his understanding, reshaping his perception of everything that had happened. What kind of threats? That is information above my clearance level, but I know the alliance between our peoples matters in ways that extend far beyond this station, this moment, this crisis. If Hendrix succeeds in destroying what we have built here, the consequences will echo across centuries. Then we can't let him succeed. How do you propose we prevent it? We are orbiting a planet controlled by people who want to see us fail. Our communications are jammed. A military vessel is approaching with orders to arrest us. The situation is... She stopped searching for the right word. Desperate, Jake finished for her, but not hopeless. There's a difference. The plan crystallized in his mind with the clarity that only true desperation can provide. It was insane, probably suicidal, and almost certainly their only option. The communication array. His voice had taken on the focused calm he remembered from combat situations, the strange peace that comes when the path forward becomes unavoidable. You said they're jamming our transmissions selectively, blocking the investigation files while allowing routine traffic. Correct. Our analysis suggests they are using a targeted interference pattern that identifies and degrades any transmission containing specific data signatures. But what about live transmission, real-time video broadcast that hasn't been processed or stored in any system they could identify? Lyra's ears perked forward as she followed his logic. A live feed would be more difficult to block. They would need to jam all communications from the station, which would contradict their narrative that we are the aggressors. Exactly. If we can get the truth out, if we can show the world what's really happening here with Carter's confession, the evidence against Hendricks, and most importantly, footage of Human and Zelthar working together peacefully, they lose their justification for the whole operation. The external antenna array. Lyra's eyes brightened with understanding. The primary array has been compromised, but there is a backup system on the station's exterior. It was damaged during a micrometeorite impact 3 months ago and never fully repaired because it was deemed non-essential. But if we could fix it, we could broadcast directly to civilian communication satellites, bypassing the military jamming entirely. The repair would require an extravehicular activity, a spacewalk. Lyra's ears flattened slightly. The damaged section is in one of the most exposed areas of the station. Radiation levels are elevated due to current solar activity. The risk would be significant. Jake met her gaze without flinching. More significant than letting them arrest you. More significant than letting Hendricks win. The moment between them extended long enough for 100 heartbeats, for the Earth to rotate a fraction of a degree below them, for the future to hold its breath, waiting for a decision. Lyra broke first, but not in the way Jake expected. Instead of arguing or pleading or trying to dissuade him, she straightened her spine and lifted her chin in a gesture of resolve that transformed her entire bearing. If you are going out there, I am going with you. Lyra, you don't have spacewalk training. I have 30 hours of EVA certification from my academy training on my homeworld. My species is more resistant to radiation than yours, and my ability to sense electrical fields will allow me to navigate the damaged systems more efficiently than any human could. That's not the point. The point is that we are partners, Jake Morrison. Not just in the personal sense, but in every sense that matters. You do not get to make heroic sacrifices while I wait safely inside. That is not who I am, and it is not what we have built together. He wanted to argue. Every protective instinct he had was screaming that he should keep her safe, that he should face the danger alone rather than risk losing her to the cold vacuum of space. But looking into her golden eyes, seeing the determination that burned there, he realized that trying to protect her against her will would be the ultimate betrayal of everything they had come to mean to each other. Commander Chen will never authorize it. Then we do not ask Commander Chen. Lyra's smile held an edge that was new and thrilling. We are, after all, facing a crisis that threatens everything we have worked for. Sometimes crises require unconventional solutions. They returned to the main station hand in hand, a unit forged in the fire of shared purpose. Tom was waiting in the corridor near the command center, his expression suggesting he had been looking for them. Jake, I've been running calculations on the incoming vessel. He fell into step beside them, lowering his voice. Based on their current trajectory and acceleration profile, we have approximately 11 hours before they reach docking range. But here's the thing, they're not taking the most efficient approach vector. What do you mean? They're coming in from an angle that keeps them in Earth's shadow for most of the approach. Minimizes our sensor coverage, makes it harder for us to track their exact position. Tom's face was grim. These aren't rescue personnel, Jake. They're operating like a boarding party expecting resistance. Lyra exchanged a glance with Jake, a silent communication that spoke volumes. They had less time than they thought, and the stakes had just gotten higher. Tom, I need you to do something for me. Something that might get you in a lot of trouble if it goes wrong. Tom's eyebrow rose. More trouble than being on a station that's about to be raided by military forces. Sure, why not? What do you need? Cover for us. Lyra and I are going to fix the backup antenna array. We're going to broadcast everything live to every civilian channel we can reach. But we need time, and we need the approach to look routine until we're ready to transmit. Tom stared at him for a long moment, processing the implications. Then a slow grin spread across his face, the same grin Jake remembered from their shared military service, when they were about to do something spectacularly inadvisable. You know, when I signed up for this program, they promised me adventure and the opportunity to make history. He clapped Jake on the shoulder. They didn't mention anything about committing what will probably be classified as treason, but I guess that's what the fine print is for. Tom, save it. You're my best friend, Jake, and more importantly, you're right. What Hendricks is doing is wrong, and if we don't stop it, we're complicit. He straightened his expression, settling into something more serious. Go save the world or whatever. I'll keep everyone looking the other way. The equipment bay where the EVA suits were stored was quiet at this hour. The banks of lockers and maintenance equipment casting long shadows in the reduced lighting. Jake moved through the familiar space with the efficiency of someone who had spent hours training for exactly this scenario, even if the circumstances were nothing like what the training manuals had anticipated. The suits were works of engineering art, layers of protection against the hostile vacuum of space wrapped around life support systems and mobility joints. Jake helped Lyra into hers first, checking each seal and connection with methodical care. Her species' slightly different proportions required adjustments to the standard human design modifications that had been made when the joint program began, but which Jake was grateful to find still functional. How does it feel? Lyra flexed her arms experimentally, her ears pressed flat against her head by the helmet's interior. Constraining, but manageable. She turned to help him with his own suit. Jake, before we go out there, there is something I need to say. Can it wait until we're not about to risk our lives in hard vacuum? No, because if something goes wrong, and I need you to know this. She sealed the final connection on his suit, then placed both hands on his chest in a gesture he now recognized as deeply significant in her culture. You spoke earlier of meaning being something we create rather than find. In my language, we have a word for that kind of meaning, Zelvar. It translates roughly as the light that exists only between two souls. I have never experienced Zelvar before you, Jake Morrison. I did not believe it was possible with someone not of my species. Those galaxy-holding irises held his through the helmet visors separated by layers of polymer and glass, but somehow closer than they had ever been. Whatever happens out there, whatever comes after, know that you have given me something my people spend lifetimes seeking. You have shown me that love is not constrained by biology or culture or the vast distances between stars. It simply is like gravity or light or the fundamental forces that hold the universe together. Jake reached up to press his gloved hand against hers where it rested on his chest. Lyra Venshar, I've spent 3 years running from the possibility of feeling anything again. I convinced myself that loving someone meant eventually losing them and that the pain of loss was too high a price for the joy of connection. You proved me wrong in every way that matters. He took a breath, feeling the suit's life support systems respond to his elevated heart rate. When this is over, when we've stopped Hendricks and secured the truth and done whatever impossible things we need to do, I want to spend however much time we have left exploring what we've started. I don't know what the future holds for a human and a Zelthar trying to build something together. But I know I want to find out. With you. Only with you. Lyra's ears would have been trembling if they had room to move inside the helmet. Instead, she simply nodded once, a single gesture that carried the weight of promises exchanged and futures accepted. Then let us go save the world, Jake Morrison, so that we may have a world left to explore together. The airlock cycled with a hiss that faded to silence as the atmosphere evacuated. Jake felt the familiar disorientation of transition, the moment when the station's artificial gravity released its hold, and his body remembered that weight was an illusion created by spinning metal. Through his helmet's visor, the universe expanded into impossible vastness, stars willing in their eternal dance against a darkness so complete it seemed to pull at his soul. Beside him, Lyra's suit reflected the light of distant suns, her form alien and beautiful against the backdrop of creation. They were tethered to the station by thin cables, their only connection to safety in an environment that would kill them in seconds if given the opportunity. Jake checked his helmet display, 11 hours until the military vessel arrived, 2 hours of oxygen in their suits, approximately 45 minutes of work to repair the antenna array if everything went perfectly. Nothing ever went perfectly. Ready. Lyra's voice came through the suit radio, slightly distorted, but unmistakable. As ready as one can be for voluntary exposure to the cosmic void. Lead the way, Jake Morrison. They began their journey along the station's exterior, moving hand over hand along the safety rails that lined the hull. The damaged antenna array was located on the station's far side, a journey of approximately 200 meters through terrain that had never been designed for travel. Maintenance hatches and sensor clusters created an obstacle course of protrusions, each one a potential hazard in the zero-gravity environment. Earth filled half the sky below them, so close Jake felt he could reach out and touch the atmosphere. Clouds swirled in patterns that spoke of weather systems affecting millions of lives, oblivious to the drama unfolding in orbit. Somewhere down there, Hendricks was orchestrating his conspiracy. Somewhere down there, people were going about their lives without knowing that the future of two species hung in the balance. Jake, Lyra's voice cut through his reverie. I am detecting unusual electromagnetic signatures ahead. The damage section may be more compromised than our initial assessments indicated. He checked his own instruments, finding the readings she described. The antenna array had been designed to transmit across multiple frequency bands simultaneously. The micrometeorite damage had apparently created a cascade of secondary failures that were now interfering with each other in unpredictable ways. Can you pinpoint the primary fault? I believe so. There appears to be a severed power conduit approximately 15 meters ahead, creating a feedback loop that is generating the interference. If we can isolate and bypass that section, we should be able to restore basic functionality. They pressed forward, the station's hull passing beneath their gloved hands in a rhythm that felt almost meditative. Jake found himself acutely aware of every sensation: the pressure of the suit against his skin, the hiss of recycled air in his helmet, the weight of infinite space pressing down from every direction. He had done EVAs before during training, but never like this, never with so much at stake and so little margin for error. The damage section came into view as they rounded a structural support beam. The antenna array was a twisted mass of metal and composite materials, the micrometeorite impact having carved a path of destruction through components that had never been designed to withstand such violence. Debris floated in a small cloud around the damaged site, fragments of station infrastructure caught in gentle orbits that would eventually decay and scatter into the void. It's worse than the reports indicated. Jake assessed the damage with a technician's eye, cataloging the repairs that would be needed. The primary transmitter is completely destroyed. We'll have to route through the secondary systems. The secondary systems are also damaged, but I believe I can establish a functional connection if you can provide power to the relay nodes. Lyra was already moving toward the twisted wreckage, her movements graceful despite the cumbersome suit. There are 3 nodes that need to be activated in sequence. I will guide you. They worked in tandem, their complementary skills fitting together like pieces of a puzzle designed by the universe itself. Jake's military training and technical expertise allowed him to navigate the physical challenges of repair work in zero gravity. Lyra's ability to sense electrical fields and her deeper understanding of communication systems allowed her to identify solutions that no human engineer would have found. Time compressed in the way it always did during crisis, minutes passing like seconds, while seconds stretched into eternities. Jake's suit display showed their oxygen reserves dropping, the military vessel's approach continuing in the window of opportunity, shrinking with every heartbeat. First node active, Lyra's voice carried a note of triumph. Moving to the second, Jake followed her through the wreckage, his hands finding purchase on whatever solid surface presented itself. A loose panel shifted beneath his grip, sending him spinning momentarily before his tether caught and arrested his movement. The universe wheeled around him, stars and earth and station trading places in a dizzying display of perspective. He steadied himself, forced his breathing to slow, and continued forward. The second node required more delicate work, a damaged connection that needed to be bypassed using components salvaged from other systems. Lyra talked him through the process, her calm voice an anchor in the chaos of exposed wiring and floating debris. Jake, I need you to hold this connection steady while I reroute the power flow. Do not let it shift even slightly or we will lose the entire circuit. He braced himself against a structural support and held the connection with both hands, feeling the vibration of electricity flowing through the repaired pathway. Lyra's fingers moved with precision, bridging gaps and creating pathways that had never been intended, but which served their purpose. Second node active, 1 more and we will have transmission capability. The final node was the most damaged, located at the very edge of the debris field where the micrometeorite had expended its last energy. Jake could see scoring on the hull around it, evidence of the violent impact that had started this cascade of destruction. The node itself was barely recognizable. its housing cracked and its internal components exposed to the vacuum. Can we salvage enough to make it work? Lyra studied the damage, her helmet turning slowly as she assessed the situation. Perhaps, but the connection will be unstable. We will have one chance to transmit before the system fails completely. Then we make it count. They worked on the final node together, their movements synchronized in a way that spoke of trust earned through shared experience. Jake held components in place while Lyra made connections. Lyra stabilized the housing while Jake rerouted power. Piece by piece, they rebuilt something functional from the wreckage of destruction. There, Lyra stepped back, her voice carrying exhaustion and triumph in equal measure. It should work. Once. Jake checked his suit display. They had been outside for nearly 2 hours. Their oxygen reserves were in the yellow zone, not quite critical, but approaching concern. The military vessel was now 8 hours away, close enough that its approach would be visible to station sensors, even without the sophisticated tracking systems that had been compromised. Let's get back inside and make the broadcast. They began the return journey, moving faster now that they knew the route. The station's airlock seemed impossibly far away, a small rectangle of light against the vast darkness of space. Jake's arms burned with the effort of the journey muscles, protesting the unfamiliar demands of zero-gravity climbing. They were halfway back when Lyra suddenly stopped, her body going rigid in a way that made Jake's blood run cold. "Lyra, what's wrong?" The electromagnetic signatures. Her voice was strained. "They have changed. Something is happening on the station." Jake turned to look back at ISS Horizon, and his heart stuttered in his chest. Emergency lights were flickering in several modules, red and amber patterns that spoke of crisis. Through the observation windows, he could see people moving with the urgency of contained panic. Tom's voice burst through his helmet radio, distorted by interference but unmistakable in its urgency. "Jake, Lyra, you need to get back here now. They've accelerated their timeline. The military vessel launched an advanced team in fast attack shuttles. They're docking in 30 minutes. The words hit him like a physical blow. 30 minutes. They had estimated 8 hours. Someone had changed the plan, pushed up the schedule, transformed an already desperate situation into something approaching impossible. Lyra's hand found his in the void between them, her grip strong despite the layers of suit material separating their skin. "We can still do this, Jake. We just need to move faster." Jake looked at her, at the determination in her golden eyes visible through 2 layers of helmet polymer, at the set of her jaw, and the angle of her ears pressed flat against her head. She was right. They could still do this. They had to still do this, because the alternative was unthinkable. "Then let's move." They pushed toward the airlock with everything they had racing against a clock that had suddenly started moving much faster than anyone expected. Behind them, the repaired antenna array waited silently, ready to broadcast a truth that could change the course of 2 civilizations. Ahead of them, a station in crisis and a future hanging by the thinnest of threads. Jake Morrison had spent 3 years running from life. Now finally, he had found something worth running toward. The airlock cycled with agonizing slowness, atmosphere rushing back into the chamber, while Jake and Lyra stood frozen in their suits, watching the pressure gauge climb towards safe levels. Every second felt like an eternity, stretched thin time itself, rebelling against their desperate need for speed. Through the small window in the inner door, Jake could see crew members rushing past in the corridor beyond, their faces tight with controlled panic. The moment the indicator turned green, they were moving, stripping off helmets and gloves as they pushed into the station proper. Tom met them at the first junction, his expression grim beneath a veneer of forced calm that Jake recognized from their shared military service. It was the face of a man delivering news that no one wanted to hear. 3 fast attack shuttles launched from the main vessel approximately 40 minutes ago. Tom fell into step beside them as they hurried toward the command center. "They've been running dark minimal emissions, which is why we didn't detect them until they were almost on top of us. Current ETA is 19 minutes. He pulled up a tactical display on his tablet showing the approach vectors. The main vessel launched these shuttles while running dark. Smaller, faster, harder to detect than the primary ship. Standard military insertion tactics. That's why our timeline just collapsed from 11 hours to 30 minutes. They never intended to wait for the big ship to arrive." Jake's mind raced through the implications. Fast attack shuttles meant a strike team, probably 12 to 15 personnel trained for hostile boarding operations. 19 minutes was not enough time to complete the broadcast, not enough time to establish the connection and transmit the evidence that would expose Hendrix's conspiracy. They had been outmaneuvered by someone who understood exactly what they were trying to do. How did they know? Lyra's voice carried an edge of frustration. We told no one about the antenna repair, except Tom. They didn't need to know specifics. Jake understood now the tactical thinking behind the accelerated timeline becoming clear. They knew we would try something. The jamming was never meant to be permanent, just long enough to get their people in position. Once they have boots on the station, it doesn't matter what we broadcast. They'll control the narrative through force. Commander Chen's voice cut through the station intercom, her tone carrying the weight of command that brooked no argument. All personnel to designated emergency stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, all personnel to designated emergency stations. Zelthar staff are to proceed to Module F for immediate assembly. Module F was the Zelthar residential section, the same area that Carter's bombs had been designed to destroy first. Now it was being used as a collection point, a way to gather all the alien personnel in one place where they could be easily detained when the boarding team arrived. Lyra stopped walking, her ears rigid with tension. They are herding us like animals. Chen is following protocols. Jake hated the words even as he spoke them. She doesn't have a choice. If she resists the boarding, she'll be removed from command and probably arrested herself. And if she cooperates, we lose everything. Lyra turned to face him fully, her golden eyes burning with an intensity he had never seen before. Jake, I cannot go to Module F. I cannot allow myself to be detained while Hendricks twists the truth into whatever shape serves his purposes. Then don't go. The words came from Tom, surprising them both. He stood with his arms crossed, his expression settled into something that looked remarkably like resolve. Tom, listen to me, both of you. I've been running calculations while you were outside playing spacewalk heroes. The broadcast from the repaired antenna will work, but it needs someone inside to initiate the transmission sequence. Someone with access to the communication systems and the technical knowledge to bypass the security lockouts that Hendrix's people have installed. Jake felt the shape of what Tom was suggesting before the words fully formed. You're going to do it. I'm going to buy you time. Tom's grin held no humor. The boarding team will head straight for the command center once they're aboard. That's standard protocol for hostile takeovers. If I'm there making noise being difficult, they'll focus on neutralizing me instead of searching for whatever you two are planning. They'll arrest you. Probably, maybe worse. Tom shrugged with the casual acceptance of someone who had made peace with consequences. But here's the thing, Jake. I've spent 15 years of following orders, doing what I was told, being a good soldier. Most of that time, I was proud of what I was doing. But this, he gestured vaguely at the situation surrounding them. This is wrong, and sometimes being a good person means being a bad soldier. Lyra stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch Tom's arm in a gesture that bridged species and culture. You would sacrifice yourself for us, for my people. I'm sacrificing myself for the truth. The fact that it helps you is a bonus. Tom's expression softened slightly. Besides, Jake's my best friend, and you make him happy in a way I haven't seen since Sarah died. That's worth protecting. Jake felt his throat constrict with emotion he could not afford to express. There was too much at stake, too little time, and too many things that needed to be said but would have to wait. Tom, thank you. Thank me by not screwing this up. Tom was already moving toward the command center, his stride purposeful. You've got maybe 15 minutes before the shooting starts. Make them count. They watched him go, this man who had been Jake's anchor through some of the darkest years of his life, walking towards certain capture with the same casual confidence he brought to everything else. Then the moment passed, and there was no more time for sentiment. The antenna array is ready. Jake's mind shifted into tactical mode, assessing options and discarding impossibilities. But Tom's right. Someone needs to initiate the transmission from inside the station. The external controls were too damaged to repair. I can do it. Lyra's voice carried certainty. My clearance gives me access to the communication systems. If I can reach the secondary control room in Module B, I can establish the connection and begin broadcasting. That's on the opposite side of the station from Module F. If they catch you outside the designated assembly area, then I will deal with the consequences. Her ears flattened in determination. Jake, we do not have time to debate alternatives that do not exist. This is our only option. She was right. He knew she was right. But sending her alone into a situation that was rapidly becoming hostile went against every instinct he possessed. I'm coming with you. No. The word hit him like a physical force. You need to be somewhere else, somewhere they will not think to look for you. Her hand found his, squeezing with an urgency that communicated more than words. The boarding team will search for resistance. They will expect us to fight them directly. What they will not expect is someone waiting at the antenna array itself, ready to ensure the transmission succeeds no matter what happens inside the station. Jake understood what she was asking. Return to the vacuum, to the repaired equipment floating in the void, and stand guard over their last hope while she risked everything inside the station. It was tactically sound. It was also the hardest thing anyone had ever asked him to do. Lyra, if something happens to you, then you will make sure our sacrifice means something. She stepped closer, pressing her forehead against his in that gesture that had become their private language. I told you once that I would rather be afraid with you than safe without you. I meant it. But right now, being with you means being apart. It means trusting each other to do what needs to be done. I don't want to lose you. You will not lose me, Jake Morrison. Her voice held harmonics that seemed to resonate in his bones. Because no matter what happens in the next hour, no matter how this ends, what we have built together cannot be destroyed by distance or circumstance. You exist in my heart now. That is forever. He kissed her, then a fierce and desperate collision that tried to compress a lifetime of feeling into a single moment. She responded with equal intensity, her hands gripping his shoulders as if she could anchor them both against the storm that was coming. When they finally separated, her golden eyes were bright with unshed tears that her species rarely allowed themselves to show. Go. Her voice was steady despite the emotion beneath it. I will see you on the other side. Jake went. Jake grabbed a fresh oxygen pack from the emergency locker, swapping it with his depleted reserves in movements made automatic by training. The return journey to the airlock felt different than before, charged with urgency and the weight of separation. He moved through corridors that were emptying as personnel followed Commander Chen's orders, heading to their designated stations, while the station itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what was coming. He passed the observation deck where he and Lyra had shared their first real conversation, the recreation bay where a joke had started everything, the maintenance corridor where they had first worked together. Each location was a memory, now a marker of a journey that had transformed him from a man running from his past into someone fighting for his future. The airlock cycled once more, and then he was outside again, the vast indifference of space surrounding him as he made his way back toward the antenna array. Earth hung below, beautiful and oblivious, while somewhere on its surface, people like Hendricks plotted the destruction of everything Jake had come to believe in. He reached the repaired equipment and settled into a position that allowed him to monitor both the antenna and the station beyond. From here, he could see the docking ports where the fast attack shuttles would arrive. From here, he could watch the beginning of the end, whatever form that ending took. The wait was the hardest part. Minutes stretched like hours, marked only by the slow consumption of his suit's oxygen reserves and the eternal wheeling of stars overhead. Jake found himself thinking about Sarah, about the life they had planned together, about all the futures that had been erased in a moment of drunk driving and tragedy. For 3 years, he had carried that loss like a wound that refused to heal, using it as justification for withdrawal and isolation. Now facing the possibility of new loss, he understood something that had eluded him in his grief. Love was not diminished by the risk of losing it. Love was made precious by that very fragility, transformed from ordinary emotion into something sacred by the courage required to offer it despite the certainty of eventual pain. Sarah would have understood. Sarah would have approved. The first shuttle appeared as a dark shape against the stars, growing rapidly larger as it approached the station. Jake watched it maneuver toward the docking port, its navigation lights blinking in patterns that spoke of military precision. 2 more shapes followed the complete strike team, arriving in formation. His helmet radio crackled with fragmented communications voices overlapping as the boarding began. He heard Commander Chen's formal protest, heard the response from someone claiming authority under emergency provisions he had never heard of, heard the sounds of a station being occupied by force. And then cutting through the chaos, Lyra's voice, "Jake, I am in position, beginning transmission sequence now." The antenna array beside him hummed to life, power flowing through the repaired conduits, with a vibration he could feel through his suit's gloves. Somewhere inside the station, Lyra was feeding data into the broadcast. The evidence of Hendricks' conspiracy, the truth of what had happened on ISS Horizon, The reality that two species could work together despite the efforts of those who feared such cooperation. Transmission initiated. Her voice was calm, professional, betraying none of the danger she must be facing. Signal strength is holding. We are broadcasting on all civilian frequencies. Jake watched the antenna's indicator lights, willing them to stay active, praying to whatever forces govern the universe that the equipment would hold together long enough to matter. Jake! Lyra's voice changed, taking on an urgency that made his blood run cold. They have found me. I am attempting to... The transmission cut off. For a moment that lasted forever, Jake hung suspended in the void. His heart stopped and his mind blank with terror. Then training took over, the ingrained responses of years of military service, pushing through the paralysis of fear. He checked the antenna array. The transmission was still active, the equipment still functioning, which meant the evidence was still being broadcast. Whatever had happened to Lyra, she had succeeded in starting the process. But the process needed time to complete. And from the sounds now filling his radio, the station was descending into chaos that might not allow for that time. Jake made a decision. He released his safety tether and pushed off from the antenna array, using the station's hull as a launching point for a trajectory that would carry him toward the nearest emergency airlock. It was a dangerous maneuver, the kind that training explicitly warned against, but training had not anticipated a situation where everything that mattered was at stake. The airlock cycled with agonizing slowness. Jake was moving before the inner door fully opened, stripping his helmet as he pushed into corridors that had transformed from familiar workplace to hostile territory. Emergency lighting cast everything in shades of red and amber, the station's way of communicating crisis to those within its walls. He heard shouting ahead, the unmistakable sounds of confrontation. Following the noise, Jake rounded a corner and found himself facing a scene that burned itself into his memory. 3 soldiers in tactical gear had Lyra pinned against a wall, her arms restrained behind her back, her ears flattened in a posture of forced submission. A 4th soldier stood nearby, speaking into a communication device, his words too low for Jake to make out, but his tone unmistakably triumphant. Behind them, through an open doorway, Jake could see the communication console that Lyra had been using. Its displays were still active, still showing the transmission status, still broadcasting the truth to anyone with the equipment to receive it. The soldiers had not destroyed the transmission. They had captured Lyra, but they had not stopped what she had started, which meant there was still a chance. Jake stepped into view, his hands raised in a gesture of non-threat that was also a position from which he could move quickly if necessary. Let her go. The soldiers turned, weapons rising to cover the new threat. The one who had been speaking into the communication device, apparently the team leader, studied Jake with the cold assessment of a professional. Jake Morrison, the technician. His voice carried an accent Jake could not place, something European layered over military precision. You are on our list, suspected collaborator with hostile alien elements. Surrender now and you will be treated according to protocol. What protocol would that be? The one where you fabricate evidence to start a war. The one where you arrest innocent people for the crime of working together. The team leader's expression did not change. You do not understand the larger picture. The Zelathar represent an existential threat to human sovereignty. Every day, they remain on this station. They gather intelligence, assess weaknesses, prepare for eventual conquest. We are protecting humanity. You're protecting fear. Jake kept his hands visible, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. You're so afraid of what's different that you'd rather destroy any chance of peace than accept that cooperation is possible. Philosophy is above my pay grade. My orders are to secure this station and detain all Zelthar personnel. You can either comply or become an obstacle. The choice is yours. Jake looked at Lyra, at the fierce determination still burning in her gaze despite her captivity. She gave him the slightest shake of her head, a warning not to do anything foolish, not to sacrifice himself for a gesture that would change nothing. But she was wrong. Sometimes gestures were all that mattered. Sometimes standing up even when you could not win was the only way to prove that some things were worth fighting for. I choose obstacle. What happened next unfolded in fragments, moments of clarity, separated by chaos that defied coherent memory. Jake moved before the soldiers could react, using the skills that 8 years of military training had burned into his reflexes. He was not trying to fight, not trying to win in any conventional sense. He was trying to create confusion, to buy seconds that might stretch into minutes, to give the transmission time to reach the people who needed to see it. The first soldier went down to a joint lock that Jake had learned in close quarters combat training. The second stumbled backward as Jake used his falling comrade as a shield. The third fired the shot going wide as Jake twisted away with reflexes sharpened by countless hours of practice. Then the team leader's weapon connected with the back of Jake's head, and the world dissolved into stars and darkness. Consciousness returned in pieces, fragments of awareness that gradually assembled themselves into something resembling coherent thought. Jake was lying on a cold floor, his hands bound behind his back, his head throbbing with the memory of impact. The taste of blood filled his mouth, copper and salt mixing with recycled air that carried the scent of fear and ozone. He opened his eyes to find himself in what appeared to be a storage compartment, the kind of utilitarian space that existed throughout ISS Horizon for supplies and equipment. Emergency lighting painted everything in shades of red, transforming the familiar into something alien and threatening. Lyra sat across from him, similarly bound her back against the wall, and her ears drooping in exhaustion. When she saw him stir, something flickered in her golden eyes, relief and concern and love, mixing in proportions that no human expression could have conveyed. Jake! His name in her voice was an anchor, a reminder that he was still alive, still present, still fighting even when the fight seemed lost. Hey? He struggled to sit up, the movement sending waves of pain through his skull. How long was I out? Approximately 40 minutes. The transmission completed before they could shut it down. The evidence is out there now, spreading through civilian networks faster than anyone can suppress it. The words took a moment to penetrate the fog of his injury. Then understanding dawned, and with it a surge of hope that cut through the darkness of their situation. We did it. We did it. Her voice carried exhaustion and triumph in equal measure. I monitored the communication channels before they moved us here. News outlets across Earth are already running the story. Independent analysts are authenticating the evidence. Hendricks is facing questions he cannot answer. Jake let his head fall back against the wall behind him, a laugh escaping his lips that bordered on hysteria. They were captured, bound, probably facing charges that would end their careers and possibly their freedom. But they had won. The truth was out, spreading like light into corners that darkness had claimed for too long. What happens now? Lyra's ears shifted into an expression he did not recognize, something between uncertainty and resolve. That depends on forces beyond our control. The boarding team has secured the station, but they are facing resistance from crew members who have seen the broadcast. Commander Chen has refused to recognize their authority pending verification from Earth. The situation is volatile. As if to underscore her words, the sound of distant shouting filtered through the storage compartment's walls. The station was not surrendering quietly, its crew refusing to accept the narrative that had been prepared for them. We need to get out of here. Our restraints are standard military issue. Without tools, escape is unlikely. Jake tested his bonds, feeling the hard polymer bite into his wrists. Lyra was right, the restraints were designed to resist exactly this kind of struggle. But desperation has a way of finding solutions that reason would dismiss. Can you reach my left boot? There's a small cutting tool in the heel compartment. Emergency equipment, standard issue for maintenance personnel. Lyra's eyes widened slightly as she processed the information. They were seated close enough that with effort she might be able to reach his feet. It would require contortion that human anatomy would have found impossible, but Zelthar physiology was more flexible than it appeared. Turn slightly to your left. I will need to extend fully. What followed was an awkward ballet of bound prisoners attempting the improbable. Lyra stretched in ways that made Jake's muscles ache in sympathy, her fingers eventually finding the concealed compartment in his boot heel. The cutting tool was small, barely more than a sharp edge attached to a handle, but it was enough. Working by touch alone, Lyra managed to position the blade against her restraints and begin the slow process of cutting through. The polymer was tough, designed to resist exactly this kind of abuse, but patience and desperation combined to overcome engineering. The restraint parted with a soft snap. Lyra quickly freed Jake, her nimble fingers making short work of his bonds. They stood together in the dim storage compartment, rubbing circulation back into their wrists while listening to the sounds of conflict beyond the walls. We need to find Tom. Jake's voice carried new determination. He was in the command center when the boarding started. They moved through the station like ghosts, using maintenance corridors and access tunnels that the boarding team had not thought to secure. The station's layout, so familiar from months of work, became their advantage, allowing them to navigate around concentrations of hostile personnel. The command center doors were sealed when they arrived, security lockouts engaged from the inside. Through the small window, Jake could see figures moving, could hear the muffled sounds of argument and negotiation. Tom was visible among them, his posture defiant despite the armed soldiers surrounding him. Jake! Lyra's hand found his arm, drawing his attention to something else. A maintenance panel near the door, the kind that provided access to the underlying systems that controlled station functions. Can you? Yes. She was already moving her fingers, finding the panel's release mechanism. The security system that controlled the command center doors was sophisticated, but it relied on power and data connections that ran through physical infrastructure. Infrastructure that a skilled engineer could manipulate. The door slid open with a pneumatic hiss that drew every eye in the command center. Jake stepped through, first his presence creating a moment of frozen surprise that Lyra used to move to a nearby console. The armed soldiers recovered quickly, weapons rising to cover the new threat. But Jake had positioned himself in a way that made shooting him likely to hit their own people. Stand down. The team leader from before, his voice carrying the strain of a situation that had grown beyond his control. You are in custody. Any resistance will be met with force. Your operation is over. Jake kept his voice calm, steady, projecting a confidence he did not entirely feel. The broadcast completed. The whole world knows what Hendricks tried to do here. Right now, there are probably lawyers and journalists and government officials fighting over who gets to tear his conspiracy apart first. You're bluffing. Am I? Jake gestured toward the command center's main display where news feeds from Earth were visible. Headlines scrolled past in multiple languages, all variations on the same theme: conspiracy. Exposed officials questioned and investigations launched. Turn it up. Let everyone hear what's happening down there. Commander Chen, who had been standing in tense negotiation with another soldier, reached over and raised the audio. A newscaster's voice filled the command center, professional tones, struggling to contain the excitement of breaking news. Unprecedented leak of classified communications has thrown the ISA Oversight Committee into chaos. Senator Martinez has called for an emergency hearing to investigate allegations that senior official Marcus Hendricks orchestrated what appears to be a false flag operation against the joint human-Zelthar space program. Meanwhile, protests are forming outside ISA headquarters. The team leader's face had gone pale, the certainty draining out of his posture as the reality of his situation became clear. He was no longer conducting an authorized operation. He was the visible face of a conspiracy that the entire world was now watching collapse. Your orders came from Hendricks. Jake pressed the advantage. Orders that were never legitimately authorized, that violated protocols and treaties and basic human decency. You have a choice right now. You can continue following those orders and go down with him, or you can stand down and let the legal process sort out who's actually responsible. The moment stretched tension thick enough to taste. Then slowly the team leader lowered his weapon. His soldiers followed suit, the fight going out of them as they recognized the impossible position they now occupied. Commander Chen stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority that the situation demanded. Lieutenant, you and your team will surrender your weapons and submit to station security pending clarification of your operational status. Any cooperation you provide will be noted in my report. It was over. Or rather, the immediate crisis was over. The larger implications would take weeks or months to fully unfold, investigations and hearings in diplomatic negotiations that would reshape the relationship between humanity and the Zelthar. But for now, in this moment, the shooting had stopped and the truth had won. Jake found Tom in this crowd of relieved crew members, his friend's face bearing fresh bruises, but his spirit apparently unbroken. You look like hell. Tom's grin was weak but genuine. I assume this means we won. We won. Jake pulled him into a hug that conveyed everything words could not express. Thank you for everything. Yeah, well, Tom returned the embrace briefly before stepping back. You can buy me a drink when we get back to Earth. Several drinks, a bar's worth of drinks. Lyra appeared at Jake's side, her presence a warmth he had learned to recognize even before he saw her. She stood close enough that their shoulders touched a point of contact that grounded him in the reality of what they had accomplished. It's really over. Her voice was soft, meant only for him. The crisis is over. Everything else is just beginning. The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of debriefings, medical examinations, and communications with Earth that seemed to never end. Jake told his story to investigators, to commanders, to journalists who had somehow obtained access to station communication channels. He told it so many times that the words began to lose meaning, becoming sounds rather than descriptions of events that had actually happened. Through it all, Lyra remained nearby, sometimes at his side and sometimes across crowded rooms, but always present in a way that made the chaos bearable. Their eyes would meet across the controlled mayhem, and something would pass between them that required no translation. Commander Chen found Jake in the observation deck during a rare moment of quiet, the commander's face showing the exhaustion that matched his own. The situation on Earth is evolving rapidly. Her voice carried the weight of information too complex to fully summarize. Hendricks has been taken into custody. The boarding team's orders have been officially disavowed. The ISA is scrambling to distance itself from everything that happened here. And the cooperation program, stronger than ever, ironically, the exposure of the conspiracy has created a backlash against anti-Zelthar sentiment. Public opinion polls are showing record support for continued partnership. Chen paused, something approaching a smile crossing her features. You and Lyra have become somewhat famous. The story of a human technician and a Zelthar engineer stopping a terrorist attack together is playing very well in the media. Jake laughed, the sound surprising him with its genuine amusement. We didn't do it for the publicity. I know. That's what makes it effective. Chen's expression grew more serious. Jake, I've been asked to inform you that you're being considered for commendation. Multiple commendations, actually. There's talk of medals, promotions, possibly even a position in the new joint command structure being proposed. I just want to stay on the station. Keep doing my job, be with Lyra. That can be arranged. Chen nodded, once a gesture of respect between equals. You've earned whatever future you want, Jake. Make it a good one. She left him alone with the stars, with the slowly rotating Earth below, with the weight of everything that had changed and the hope of everything that might come next. Lyra found him there an hour later, her approach silent until she settled beside him at the observation window. They did not speak immediately, simply existing together in a moment of peace that felt precious after the chaos they had survived. The Zelthar High Council has issued a statement. Her voice was quiet, contemplative. They have formally recognized the actions of ISS Horizon's human crew in stopping the attack. My government is calling for expanded cooperation, accelerated exchange programs, deeper integration of our species' efforts. That's good. It is remarkable. She turned to look at him, her luminous stare reflecting the Earthlight. One day ago, we were facing the possibility of war. Now we are discussing expanded partnership. The universe changes quickly when truth is given room to breathe. Jake reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. And what about us? What do Zelthar traditions say about what happens next? Lyra's ears curved in that subtle smile he had learned to love. Our traditions are complex. There are ceremonies, rituals, formal acknowledgments of bond pairing that must be observed. She paused, something playful entering her voice. But I believe the first step is quite simple. You have already completed it, in fact. What step is that? Saying yes. He remembered then the joke that had started everything, the casual words tossed out in a recreation bay that had somehow become the foundation of something real and lasting and precious beyond measure. I did say that, didn't I? You did, and I have been waiting patiently for you to understand what that means. Jake turned to face her, fully taking both her hands in his. The stars wheeled slowly beyond the window, indifferent to the small dramas of mortal creatures, but somehow appropriate witnesses nonetheless. Lyra Venshar, I said yes as a joke, and then I said yes as a promise, and now I'm saying yes as everything I have and everything I am. Whatever your traditions require, whatever ceremonies need to happen, whatever the future holds for a human and a Zelthar trying to build something together, my answer is yes. It will always be yes. Her ears rose to their full height, trembling with emotion that her species rarely displayed so openly. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate with the fundamental frequencies of the universe itself. Then we are bound, Jake Morrison, in the way of my people and in the way of yours, in the light of these stars and in the darkness between them, for as long as consciousness endures. She kissed him then, or he kissed her, the distinction no longer mattering in a moment that belonged to both of them equally. The universe continued its eternal expansion around them, galaxies spinning and stars burning, and the vast machinery of existence grinding forward without pause or pity. But in that small observation deck orbiting a small planet around an unremarkable star, two hearts had found their gravity and were no longer falling. They were home. 3 months later, the station had transformed. The scars of the crisis had been repaired, new personnel had arrived to replace those who had departed, and the rhythms of daily life had reasserted themselves with the resilience that characterized both species. But something fundamental had changed in the character of ISS Horizon, a sense of shared purpose that made the cooperation feel less like an experiment and more like a natural state of being. Jake stood in the recreation bay that had started everything, watching a scene that would have been impossible mere weeks before. Human and Zelthar crew members sat together at tables sharing meals and jokes and the casual intimacy of colleagues who had become friends. Martinez was arguing with a Zelthar scientist about the station's plumbing. Some debates never changed. Thompson had apparently convinced two alien engineers that recycled water quality varied by day of the week, a myth that was now spreading through both species. Tom was teaching Kelvin the finer points of Earth card games, the young Zelthar's ears twitching in concentration as he tried to master the concept of bluffing. Lyra appeared at his shoulder, her presence announced by the subtle shift in the air that his senses had learned to recognize. She wore the insignia of her new position, a joint liaison role that kept her on ISS Horizon while facilitating communication between the species. You are being contemplative, just thinking about how much has changed. Change is the nature of existence. The question is always whether we change towards something better or something worse. Jake turned to look at her, this alien woman who had become the center of his universe. 3 months of building a relationship had taught him the nuances of her expressions, the subtle language of her ears, the harmonics in her voice that conveyed emotion beyond words. He could read her now in ways that would have seemed impossible when they first met. Have I told you today that I love you? Her ears curved in amusement. You told me this morning and last night and several times yesterday. I am beginning to suspect you enjoy the repetition. I spent 3 years not saying it to anyone. I'm making up for lost time. She leaned into him, her shoulder against his in that casual contact that had become their norm. Then continue. I do not tire of hearing it. Arya's voice chimed softly from a nearby speaker. I am pleased to report that my audio system malfunctions have been fully resolved. Though I reserve the right to experience future technical difficulties should romantic circumstances require. Jake laughed. You're never going to let us forget that Elvis incident, are you? I have no idea what you are referring to, Technician Morrison. My memory banks contain no record of any such incident. A pause that somehow managed to sound smug. However, I have taken the liberty of adding "can't help falling in love" to the station's emergency broadcast rotation. For morale purposes. The familiar vibration of the station's systems engines thrumming and system cycling and the complex dance of life support maintaining the bubble of habitability that protected them from the void. Earth turned below blue and green and white, carrying billions of souls who were slowly learning that they were not alone in the universe, and that being not alone might be the greatest gift existence had to offer. Jake thought about Sarah, about the future they had planned together, about the grief that had driven him to the stars in search of escape. He still carried that grief, would always carry it, but it no longer defined him. It had become part of a larger story, a chapter that led to other chapters, a sorrow that had made possible a joy he could never have anticipated. What are you thinking? Lyra's voice was soft, private, meant only for him. I'm thinking that I finally understand something my father used to say. He told me once that life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about finding things worth being hurt for. Your father sounds like he was wise. He was. I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I do now. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the recreation bay fill with the sounds of two species learning to be one community. The universe continued its expansion, galaxies flying apart at the speed of light, entropy increasing toward an eventual heat death that would erase all meaning and memory. But that ending was billions of years away, and the present moment was warm and full and precious beyond measure. Jake Morrison had come to ISS Horizon running from his past. He had found something worth staying for, worth fighting for, worth building a future around. In the vast indifference of space, two hearts had found each other and discovered that love was the gravity that made all other forces bearable. And in the end, that was enough. In the recreation bay, Tom shuffled the cards one more time, watching Kelvon's ears twitch in concentration. You know, Tom said casually, for someone who claims to not understand bluffing, you're pretty good at keeping secrets. Kelvin's ears perked up. What secrets would those be? The way you've been watching me when you think I'm not paying attention? Jake's not the only one who noticed a certain someone's interest. The young Zelthar's skin flushed a deeper blue. I do not know what you are implying. Tom grinned, laying down a winning hand. Sure you don't. Same time tomorrow. Kelvon's ears curved into what might have been a smile. I believe I can arrange that. Through the observation window, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the small miracles unfolding aboard ISS Horizon. But perhaps that was the point. The universe did not need to care for love to matter. It only needed two hearts brave enough to reach across the void. And on this station, suspended between worlds, that kind of courage was becoming contagious.